Welcome back. As of today, the most viewed video on this channel is called What is a Blunder? And in that video, I came up with the definition that works best for me as to what a blunder is, and that is a move that significantly decreases one's chances of winning. A mistake has the same definition, just without the word significantly. But if you've done a lot of analysis of your games via Stockfish or with the automated game reports or game reviews that you run after the game, you know that not all blunders are created equal, and I decided to come up with a way to help me classify blunders to make sense of them in my head as to the significance of them. One obvious way to classify blunders into more than one group is by their severity. Some blunders are worse than others. The eval bar jumps further than for other blunders. For example, in this game, I blunder on the next move after this position, but it only moved the evaluation bar about 3 points, whereas later in the game, when my opponent blundered, it moved the evaluation bar much further. Right here, my opponent has just moved in to the center with their knight, and it was a mistake for me to take back. And the reason is because this pawn can take and it's protected by the bishop, and then that pawn is threatening two of my pieces and it's going to win one of them. I didn't see that immediately, so I took. But you can see the evaluation bar only moved about just over 3 points, from close to even to plus 3.6. And my opponent did see it and was going to win one of those pieces. However, later in the game, in this position, my king has gone after the opponent's rook. You can see that the eval bar is at about plus 1.4, which is in my opponent's favor. My opponent should have moved their rook, but they should not have moved it to where they did. They should have moved it over here where it would be protected by the other rook, but instead they moved it back to h3. And in that case, that's just simply hanging a piece, and I took it, and you can see that the evaluation bar moved to minus 7.7. So that was like a 9-point swing. So when I take their bishop, I have a clear and significant advantage. I'm a full rook ahead at this point. So those are two types of blunders. One's not that bad, and one is very severe. But the reason that I made this video is that I came up with a slightly better way, or at least better for me, way to classify blunders. And I decided to classify them into beginner or elementary blunders, intermediate, and advanced or expert level blunders. As a matter of fact, the two that I just showed you are good examples of the first two. This one that my opponent just made here is an example of an elementary blunder. It just hangs a piece in one move. When the rook goes there, it goes directly into the path of the bishop, and it isn't protected by anything. They don't even go down and exchange. They simply lose a piece. So this is what I'm calling an elementary blunder. And the first one that we looked at way back on move 7, the knight was in the middle and I took. This is more of an intermediate level blunder because it requires seeing more than just one piece. Because yes, we're going to exchange pieces here, but then I'm going to lose another one, and it requires seeing a little bit further into the game once this pawn takes here. It might seem like a small thing to separate these into two groups, and if you're more advanced than me, they probably both look like elementary level blunders. But at my level, this one seems more advanced. The first one, just moving the rook into the path of the bishop, very simple one-move capture. This is a little bit more complicated to me. And then the same thing might hold true for the more advanced level blunders. Let me give you a couple of more examples. Here in this position, we're on move 4. I moved my knight into the center to attack this bishop. My opponent, instead of protecting the bishop, which they could have done in a number of ways, simply pushed that pawn, which I assume was in order to get this bishop out to one of these two squares, but instead that just hangs the bishop. This is an example of a beginner or elementary level blunder, because clearly one piece is under attack and it's not defended, and I just win a free piece. Another example that you might remember from a game that I made a video on in which I lost to the weakest bot on chess.com, Martin, is in this position right here. I was way ahead on material. As you can see, I have a second queen down here in the corner. My opponent's just moved this queen here, and it looks like it's attacking this bishop. My immediate thinking was, I can take this knight, and I did. The problem with that is that it hung checkmate in one move. So when I took the knight, Martin immediately checkmated me. That I count as an elementary or beginner level blunder, because before we make any move, we should see if the opponent has any possible checks, or in this case, checkmates. But some blunders are more advanced than that. They require one or both players spotting tactical sequences or missing tactical sequences, rather than just finding a free piece or hanging a checkmate. For example, in the position shown on the board right now, my opponent has just moved this rook into the middle, attacking this bishop. I think I analyzed this game in a previous video, but it's a good example here. They're also attacking this pawn. Now, one thing I didn't spot was how crucial this bishop is to guarding this square, because their knight wants to move in there to fork my king and my queen. Another thing I didn't spot was that the bishop is currently defended, and it's actually the pawn that's under attack. What I did was move my bishop, and that's a blunder. It's a blunder if the opponent spots the fact that this square is now undefended and they can win my queen for the knight. What I should have done was move my queen here to guard the pawn, or second to that, going ahead and putting the queen all the way back on h7. This I'm classifying as an intermediate blunder because it doesn't immediately hang the piece when I move the bishop out. It does hang a piece, but it's a move later. Another example is as follows. In this position, I thought I was attacking the queen when I took this pawn with my rook. That turns out to be a huge blunder because I'm not actually attacking the queen. This pawn is pinned, and it requires the opponent noticing that this pawn is pinned. They can just take this rook, and it's free. If I take back, they'll get my queen, and they'll be ahead a full rook. But instead, my opponent blundered in turn, thought their queen was under attack, and moved out of the way. So both of those I would count as intermediate blunders rather than a beginner blunder because it doesn't hang a piece immediately, or it does in this case, but it requires a little bit of knowledge of tactics for, in this case, the pin. The fact that that pawn can't move. Now, most of these intermediate level blunders I do understand, and sometimes I see them in the games and sometimes I don't. One of my goals right now is to learn to spot more of these, and I think I'm getting better at them now that I've mostly eliminated the beginner level blunders. But some advanced blunders, I can't understand what's wrong with them at all, and I'll just give one example of that. In this position right here, I spotted that the f3 square was ripe for forking the enemy king and queen, and the best way that I could see to get a knight there to fork those two pieces was to move it to h4 and then aim in there. Now, I do understand that it's not the best move or not a great move because the opponent can get out of it. For example, once I put my knight here on h4, they could just move their queen and it would no longer be forkable. For example, they could just put their queen here. When I moved here, it's a blunder, but they could also castle out of it, which is what they did, and that's their best move. So they castled, and now my knight doesn't make any sense being over here at all, but I don't see how it's a blunder. And maybe one of the advanced players could explain this to me, but this is just one example of many that probably most of us have run into in our game evaluations or analyses using Stockfish or the game reviews. It's not a bad move. It doesn't hang a piece. It is a one-move attack, a simple threat that's easily thwarted, but what makes it a blunder? I don't know. If I turn on the engine lines, which you can't see here, it says my best move is actually to play a5. And I think I see why that's a better move, that it gets an advance attack going here, and my second best move is to move my f-rook over to b8. I think the idea here is that they are probably going to castle queenside, and it's a good idea to get an attack started there, to get this a-pawn moving, to get both my rooks over here aiming downward toward the castled king, or the soon-to-be castled king. This doesn't hang a piece, it doesn't hang checkmate, but it's counted as a blunder. So one reason that I came up with this classification was to help myself when I'm going through game reviews and I can't figure out why one move's a blunder. If I can classify a blunder as an advanced one, then I can rest easy not understanding it. Maybe I'll understand it eventually, but I don't have to understand it now, and I don't have to feel bad for not spotting why that move is so bad. One reason it could be bad is because it wastes time. Once I play that move, the opponent can castle, and still my best move now is a5, but now I'm a turn behind in playing it. Another good move here is f5, or just bringing the knight back. The idea is that it wasted a move. At my level, that's not really a blunder, but I could see why it would be at a more advanced level. Hopefully this helps you. If you're going through game reviews, you're struggling to see the differences between blunders, try to classify them, or at least it helps me. Hopefully it will help you. Classify blunders as the very elementary beginner level blunders where you hang a piece, or you allow your opponent a checkmating sequence that's obvious and easy to spot, versus the kind that requires seeing a tactical sequence like a pinned piece or a fork, versus the more advanced level blunders like wasting time or having a slightly weaker position, which Stockfish can't tell the difference between those blunders. To Stockfish, both of them seem obvious, but to us, especially those of us who are not yet advanced high-level players, these don't seem that obvious. It might seem like an inaccuracy, but I wouldn't count it as a blunder. But Stockfish does, because it sees that moving a5 now is much more important, or getting the rook over here to line up and start advancing on the queenside position is much more important than trying to fork a king and a queen that are easily going to get out of it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.